Clothing store employees spent an hour humiliating me for my weight, not knowing I was the heiress they were expecting. I walked into the flagship designer boutique wearing jeans and a t-shirt, planning to buy a dress for my family's charity gala next week. The saleswomen looked up from their phones, scanned me from head to toe, and immediately went back to scrolling. I was taken aback since their manager had been calling me for weeks to personally style me for the event. The first saleswoman, rake thin in a designer suit, walked over and said, "I think you're in the wrong store. The plus-size shop is 3 blocks down. They have roomier options." Her colleague laughed from behind the counter. "This is couture, sweetie. Everything here is sample size. You understand what that means, right? Size 0 or 2. Maybe a 4 if we're being generous." I told them I was looking for an evening gown, and the first woman actually snorted. "An evening gown? For what? Watching Netflix on your couch?" She turned to her colleague. "She probably thinks she's going to Cinderella herself into something 2 sizes too small." The other one added, "Honey, squeezing into expensive clothes won't make you look rich. It'll just make you look desperate, like a sausage in designer casing." When I started browsing the racks, the first saleswoman physically stepped between me and the clothes. "Please don't touch the merchandise. The oils from your skin, especially when you're sweating, can damage the fabrics." I wasn't sweating, but she continued. "These pieces are for people with self-control. You clearly don't understand portion control, so you probably don't understand how to handle luxury items either." The second one decided to give me advice while I looked. "You know, if you lost about 100 pounds, you might fit into our largest size. Have you tried eating less? It's really not that hard if you have any discipline." Her colleague chimed in, "She probably doesn't even know what a gym looks like. Look at those arms. That's years of choosing McDonald's over movement." When I picked up a beautiful black gown to look at the price, the first saleswoman snatched it from my hands. "This is $8,000. Even if you could afford it, which clearly you can't, it would never fit you. The designer doesn't make circus tents." She held it up against herself. "See? This is what it's supposed to look like on a real woman, not whatever you are." They started taking photos of me pretending to be subtle. This is hilarious. When fat people think they belong in high fashion, they posted it to the store's private Instagram story with pig emojis. "Look at her thinking she can shop here. Probably ate her way through her entire paycheck and thinks one dress will make her pretty woman." The manager's assistant walked by and the saleswomen called her over. "This woman refuses to leave. She's making our actual customers uncomfortable." The assistant looked at me with disgust. "Ma'am, this is an exclusive boutique. We cater to a certain aesthetic. You're ruining the ambiance. Perhaps Walmart has something more your speed and size." When I said I had money to spend, they all laughed. "What, your welfare check came in?" The first one said. "Fat people are fat because they're lazy, and lazy people don't have money. Successful people have self-control. You probably spent your last dollar on a bucket of chicken before waddling in here." The assistant added, "Security should really screen people better. We can't have just anyone walking in off the street thinking they belong here." The second saleswoman pulled out a measuring tape. "Let's see how delusional you are." She wrapped it around my waist without permission, announcing the number loudly. "Yep, you're about 3 of our mannequins combined. The only thing we have that would fit you is maybe a tablecloth from our home collection." They all laughed while she measured my arms too. "Look at these, bigger than my thighs. How do you even find sleeves?" They actually called security to escort me out. "This woman is loitering and making customers uncomfortable with her presence," the first saleswoman told the guard. He grabbed my arm and started pulling me toward the door while they narrated. "This is what happens when you don't know your place. Imagine thinking you could afford anything here when you clearly shop at thrift stores." The assistant sprayed air freshener behind me. "Finally, we can breathe again without smelling fast food grease." The first one got more biting as security dragged me. "You know what's sad? You probably have no friends, no romantic prospects, no life, and you thought buying a designer dress would change that. But you can't dress up diabetes and heart disease. You're going to die alone and fat, and no amount of designer fabric can hide that." The others nodded in agreement, one adding, "She'll probably stress eat about this rejection later. It's a vicious cycle with these people." That's when the manager came running out of her office, completely out of breath. "Oh my God, Miss Blake. I'm so glad to see you." She was practically bowing. "I've been calling your assistant for weeks about styling you for the charity gala. Your mother said you might stop by." She turned to the saleswomen, whose faces had gone pale. "Has my staff been treating you well?" The manager's face went white as she turned back to me, waiting for my answer about how her staff had been treating me. I took a long breath and felt everyone's eyes burning into me. "I need to speak with you privately right now." The security guard still had his hand wrapped around my arm, and I looked down at his grip. "Let go of me immediately." He looked confused, but the manager practically ran over to us. "Release her this instant." She was stumbling over apologies while waving him away. "Miss Blake, I am so sorry. Please come to my office." The guard dropped my arm like it was on fire and stepped back. The saleswomen stood frozen by the counter with their faces completely drained of color. They knew their careers might be ending. I followed the manager through the store without looking at them, even though my legs were shaking. My head stayed high as we walked past the racks of expensive clothes. She fumbled with her office door and held it open for me. Please, please sit down. I lowered myself into the leather chair across from her desk. I am Miss Blake. My voice came out steady, even though my stomach was churning. My family's gala is next week. She nodded frantically. Your staff just committed assault and defamation against me. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. I need you to preserve all security footage from today immediately. She spun to her computer and started clicking. And any social media posts your employees made. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Everything needs to be saved right now. She kept nodding while pulling up different programs. Of course, absolutely, I'm doing it now. The manager turned back to me with panic in her eyes. I'll fire everyone involved immediately. She was practically begging. You can have anything in the store for free. I shook my head. I don't want rushed decisions or bribes. She kept apologizing, but I could see she was more worried about her own job than what actually happened to me. I want real accountability. She nodded so hard I thought her head might fall off. I need written documentation of all 3 employees' names. My anger was turning cold and focused. Their positions and their schedules for the past month. She scrambled to pull up employee files. I also want contact information for the security company. She was typing everything into a document. And confirmation in writing that all evidence will be preserved. The manager printed out pages while her hands shook. Here's everything you asked for. I took the papers and folded them carefully. My phone came out and I texted my assistant to start documenting everything. I told them to screenshot any social media posts about the store from today. The manager watched me type with wide eyes. I stood up and walked to the door. I'm leaving now. She followed me out of the office. I pulled out my phone again and took photos of the storefront. The red marks on my arm where the security guard grabbed me showed up clearly in the pictures. My hands were steady now, even though my stomach was still churning. I walked through the store without looking at any of the clothes. The saleswomen were huddled by the register, whispering frantically to each other. They went silent as I passed them. Walking out on my own terms instead of being dragged by security felt like a small victory. The manager followed me all the way to the door. Miss Blake, I am so sorry. She kept apologizing, but I didn't respond. The glass door closed behind me, and I stood on the sidewalk. My phone was already in my hand, and I called my assistant. Clear my afternoon schedule. My voice sounded calm, but I could feel the adrenaline crash starting. I need to go home and plan my next steps. The shaking was getting worse, and I needed to get somewhere private. My car was parked 2 blocks away, and each step felt heavy. The driver opened the door, and I collapsed into the back seat. Home, please. He looked at me in the mirror, but didn't ask questions. The drive felt like it took forever, even though it was only 20 minutes. I stared out the window, watching the city blur past. My arm was throbbing where the guard had grabbed me. At home, I went straight to my study and sat at my desk. Should I call my mother right away, or gather more information first? She would want to handle this her way, which meant quietly to avoid scandal. The family name was everything to her. But staying quiet wasn't what was needed here. Those women had humiliated people before, and would do it again if nothing changed. I decided to wait and build my case first. My assistant arrived within an hour with a laptop and notebooks. We sat at my dining room table and started organizing everything. Every insult got written down exactly as I remembered it. The timeline started with walking in and ended with the manager recognizing me. We listed potential witnesses, including other customers who had been in the store. My assistant found the store's Instagram, and we scrolled through their posts. The pig emoji post was still there in their stories. We screenshotted immediately before it could disappear. 3 hours passed while we built our documentation. Having everything written down and organized made me feel more in control. The shaking had finally stopped, and my anger had turned into determination. This wasn't just about me anymore. My assistant pulled up the manager's emails on her laptop, and we went through them one by one. The first email came 3 weeks ago, asking if I'd like a private styling session for the gala. Then another 4 days later saying she had set aside several gowns in my size. A third one mentioned how honored they'd be to dress me for such an important event. The fourth email included photos of dresses she thought would look stunning on me. Each message got more eager, and the timestamps showed something interesting. While the manager was typing these fawning emails upstairs, her staff was downstairs posting cruel photos of other customers on their Instagram. My assistant found a post from the exact same day as the manager's most recent email, showing a woman trying on a dress with laughing emojis, and comments about how some people didn't know their place. The pattern was clear, and my stomach twisted seeing how the store operated on 2 completely different levels. That night, I couldn't get comfortable in bed and kept feeling the security guard's fingers digging into my arm. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard their voices calling me lazy and saying I'd die alone. My sheets got tangled as I tossed and turned, replaying each insult. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea. The bruises on my arm were turning purple and yellow now. By sunrise, I knew what needed to happen, because this went deeper than just getting an apology or some free clothes. The next morning, I found the corporate number on their website and called their customer service line. The woman who answered sounded bored until I mentioned discrimination and assault at their flagship store. She transferred me to a supervisor who took down every detail while I kept my voice steady and factual. They gave me a case number and said someone from regional management would contact me within 24 hours. After that call, I looked up the building's security company and filed another report. The woman taking my information gasped when I explained that their guard had grabbed me for shopping while being fat. She kept apologizing even though she wasn't there, and said their contract with the boutique would be under review immediately. My assistant had been researching attorneys, and found Lila Espinoza, who specialized in discrimination cases. She called Lila's office and got us an appointment for that afternoon. I spent the rest of the morning organizing all our screenshots and documentation into a folder. Having everything printed and organized made me feel more prepared for whatever came next. Before the attorney meeting, I decided to stop at another boutique downtown that advertised inclusive sizing. The difference was immediate when I walked in, and the staff smiled genuinely. They showed me to a fitting room without any comments about my body. The saleswoman brought me 6 different gowns and waited outside while I tried them on. When I came out in a deep blue dress, she adjusted the hem and said it looked beautiful. I bought it right there, and she wrapped it carefully in tissue paper. This was what shopping was supposed to feel like. Lila Espinoza's office was on the 10th floor of a modern building downtown. She reviewed all our documentation while taking notes on a yellow legal pad. She explained that weight wasn't a protected class in our state, but assault and defamation definitely were. The security footage would be key evidence, and the social media posts showed a pattern of discrimination. She said we had strong claims that could result in real consequences for the store. When she asked about my goals, I told her I wanted policy changes and training requirements, not just money. She nodded and said we could structure our demands around systemic change rather than just compensation. We spent another hour going through possible outcomes and strategies. She would send preservation letters immediately to prevent them from destroying any evidence. That evening, my assistant's phone buzzed with an anonymous message from someone claiming to work part-time at the boutique. They sent dozens of screenshots from the store's private Instagram stories going back a whole year. Post after post showed staff mocking customers' bodies and making cruel jokes. One showed a woman crying in the fitting room with the caption about how reality hit hard. Another had a customer from behind with pig emojis and comments about farm animals escaping. My situation wasn't unique or isolated, but part of how they operated every single day. Lila worked fast and sent official preservation notices to both the boutique and corporate headquarters that night. The letters made it illegal for them to delete any electronic communications or security footage related to my visit. We made backup copies of everything on multiple drives and in cloud storage. My assistant created a detailed timeline with every piece of evidence labeled and organized. The legal process was starting to feel real now, with official paperwork and case numbers. Each step forward made me more determined to see this through to actual change. My phone rang at 8 the next morning while I was drinking coffee and going through emails. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from corporate headquarters. I answered and heard a woman's voice asking if this was Miss Blake. She introduced herself as Natalia Herrera, the regional director for the boutique chain. Her tone was professional, but I could hear worry underneath as she asked if we could meet to discuss what happened at the store. She said she'd reviewed the incident reports and wanted to address my concerns personally. I could tell from how carefully she chose her words that corporate was taking this seriously now. The fact that someone this high up was calling me directly meant they understood the potential damage this could cause them. I told her I'd be willing to meet, but I had several conditions that weren't negotiable. First, my attorney Lila would be present for any discussion about this matter. Second, we'd meet at a neutral location, not at any corporate office or store property. Third, I wanted to record our entire conversation for my records. She agreed to all 3 conditions immediately without even trying to negotiate, which told me their legal team had already briefed her. We scheduled the meeting for the next morning at 9 at Lila's office downtown. After hanging up, I called Lila to confirm she was available and to update her on this development. She said Natalia calling personally was a good sign that they wanted to resolve this without litigation. I spent the rest of the morning researching Natalia online and found she'd been with the company for 15 years. Her LinkedIn showed she'd worked her way up from the store manager to regional director overseeing 12 locations. That afternoon, I decided I needed help understanding the media side of this situation if it went public. I called around and found a PR consultant who specialized in crisis management and discrimination cases. She came to my apartment that evening, and we spent 3 hours going through different scenarios. She helped me write a statement that focused on systemic problems in luxury retail, rather than personal attacks on individuals. We practiced answering tough questions, and she taught me how to redirect conversations back to the real issues. She explained how to control the narrative if journalists started calling, and what to avoid saying that could hurt my case. Having this preparation made me feel more confident about whatever might come next. The meeting room at Lila's office had a long conference table and windows overlooking the city. Natalia arrived right on time with another woman she introduced as Sharon Mack, their corporate lawyer. We all sat down and I placed my phone on the table, starting the recording app while stating the date and who was present. Lila spread out all our documentation across the table, including printed screenshots of the social media posts. I pushed the photos of the red marks on my arm toward them, and watched Natalia's face change as she looked at them. She picked up each piece of evidence and studied it carefully, while Sharon whispered legal terms I couldn't quite hear. I stayed calm while describing each thing that happened, starting with how the saleswomen looked at me and dismissed me immediately. I explained how they physically blocked me from the clothes and measured my body without permission. Natalia's expression showed real disturbance as I described the security guard grabbing me and the assistant spraying air freshener. She took notes on everything while Sharon kept checking her phone, probably getting updates from their legal team. When I finished, Natalia set down her pen and looked directly at me. She said the sales staff at that location faced extreme pressure to maintain the brand's exclusive image. She explained that only having sample sizes in the store created an environment where body shaming became normalized behavior. The staff got bonuses based on maintaining certain customer demographics, and were punished if the wrong people were seen shopping there. She wasn't making excuses, she said, but wanted me to understand the toxic culture that led to this incident. I appreciated her honesty, but told her that understanding why it happened didn't eliminate the need for real consequences. The culture she described was exactly the problem that needed to change. I pulled out the list Lila and I had prepared with our demands for resolution. First, we wanted mandatory sensitivity training for all staff at every location, not just a one-time seminar but quarterly sessions. Second, they needed to revise their security protocols so guards couldn't physically remove customers without actual cause. Third, we wanted a public commitment to inclusive customer service posted in every store and on their website. Fourth, I wanted personal written apologies from each of the 3 employees who participated in humiliating me. Natalia wrote down each demand while Sharon leaned over to whisper concerns about liability and precedent. The power dynamic in this room was completely different from that day in the store when I had no voice. Now they were the ones worried about what I might do next. After 20 minutes of discussion, they made their counteroffer. They'd provide me with VIP treatment for life at any of their locations, including personal shopping and exclusive previews. They'd also make a substantial donation to any charity I chose, suggesting a mid-6-figure amount. The catch was, I'd have to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, preventing me from ever discussing this incident publicly. I shook my head and told them performative gestures and buying silence wouldn't fix the systemic problem. Real change required transparency and accountability, not secret payoffs to make problems disappear. Sharon started to argue about protecting the brand's reputation, but Natalia raised her hand to stop her. She said she understood my position and would take our demands back to the executive team for consideration. We agreed to reconvene in 3 days to continue negotiations. That afternoon, while I was at home reviewing my notes, my assistant forwarded me an email from someone claiming to be a journalist. She was investigating patterns of discrimination at luxury retailers and had heard about an incident at this particular boutique. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to share my experience as background information for her article. I called her back and agreed to provide context about what happened, but said I didn't want to become the story myself. She assured me she could keep me anonymous while using the information to establish a pattern of behavior. She mentioned she'd already heard similar accounts from multiple sources, which made me realize how widespread this problem was. We talked for an hour, and she confirmed that at least 4 other people had contacted her about that specific store. The next morning, I was checking emails when Lila called with interesting news. A woman named Adriana Velez had reached out through her office after hearing about our case through legal networks. She'd had a similar experience at the same boutique 6 months ago, but had been too intimidated to report it. She wanted to know if she could support our complaint by sharing her story with the authorities. I called Adriana immediately, and we talked for 2 hours about what happened to her. The same saleswomen had mocked her weight and refused to show her certain items, saying she'd stretch them out. Security had followed her around the store and made her so uncomfortable she left crying. She'd wanted to complain but didn't think anyone would believe her or care about her experience. Her story strengthened our position because it showed this wasn't just one bad day, but an ongoing pattern of discrimination. We exchanged all our documentation, and she agreed to let Lila include her experience in our formal complaint. That afternoon, Lila filed the complaint with the Consumer Protection Agency, including both my experience and Adriana's with her written consent. The government investigation would create pressure beyond what corporate wanted to handle through private negotiations. She also sent copies to the Human Rights Commission and the Better Business Bureau to create multiple pressure points. The case was building momentum beyond just my individual complaint into something that could force real systemic change. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was making breakfast, and Natalia's name showed up on the screen. She told me all 3 saleswomen had been placed on administrative leave while they investigated everything. She mentioned they were bringing in some outside firm to review how the store operates and trains people. I wrote down everything she said in my notebook, but knew that leave wasn't the same as actually firing them. That afternoon, I was scrolling through my laptop when my assistant sent me a link to some fashion blog that had posted this vague story about drama at the boutique. The comments section was already filling up with people guessing what happened. Some people were saying stores should be held accountable, but others were defending the boutique's right to maintain their standards. Reading strangers debate my experience made my stomach twist. Within hours, my social media started blowing up with nasty messages from people who somehow figured out I was involved. They called me sensitive and told me I should just lose weight instead of complaining. One message said I was ruining people's careers because I couldn't handle the truth about my body. I screenshotted everything, reported the accounts for harassment, then turned off all my notifications. I spent the rest of the day organizing the screenshots into folders and backing them up to multiple drives. 3 nights later at my parents' house for our monthly family dinner, My mother cornered me in the kitchen while I was getting water. She said she'd heard about the situation through her friends and thought I should accept whatever settlement they offered quietly. She kept saying our family didn't need this kind of attention and that making a scene would just embarrass everyone. I set down my glass and explained that staying quiet is exactly how these places keep hurting people. I told her our privilege meant we had a responsibility to speak up when others couldn't. She pressed her lips together and said she didn't agree but would respect my choice. The next morning, Lila called me into her office where she had papers spread across her entire conference table. She'd drafted a proposal that focused on actual policy changes instead of just asking for money. The demands included mandatory diversity training every quarter, getting mannequins in different sizes, and having outside audits of their customer service every 3 months. She explained we wanted to fix the culture, not just punish a few people. I read through every page, making notes about specific training topics I wanted included. 2 days later, Sharon called Lila's office with corporate's response. They offered me a huge payout plus lifetime VIP treatment at all their stores, but wanted a complete NDA that would prevent me from ever talking about what happened. They also refused to admit any wrongdoing and wanted the whole thing to disappear. Lila put them on speaker, so I could hear Sharon reading through their terms. I shook my head the entire time, knowing they were still trying to buy silence instead of making real changes. We spent the next 3 hours drafting our counter response. We'd keep the settlement amount confidential, but I had to retain the right to discuss my actual experience. Plus, the mandatory training and security review had to be included no matter what. Lila explained we were showing flexibility on some points while keeping our core demands intact. She faxed our response that afternoon and we waited. 3 days before the gala, Sharon called back saying corporate refused to admit any systemic problems existed at their stores. They kept insisting this was one isolated incident with a few bad employees. Lila and I sat in her office planning our backup strategy. If they wouldn't agree to real changes by the gala, we'd go public with everything afterward. The deadline put pressure on both sides since they knew the gala would have media coverage. Meanwhile, my inbox kept filling with messages from other people who'd had similar experiences at that boutique or other luxury stores. A woman named Sarah told me she'd been followed around by security for an hour just for being black. Another person described being told they were too old to wear the clothes there. With their written permission, I forwarded all their accounts to the Consumer Protection Agency. Each story made the pattern more obvious. The investigator at the agency called to confirm they'd received everything, and said this was building into a significant case. The morning before the gala, Natalia called asking for one final meeting. She promised they had a new proposal that would address our concerns. I agreed but told her both Lila and my PR consultant had to be there. She said that was fine and suggested we meet at Lila's office that afternoon. I spent the morning reviewing all our documentation one more time, making sure we had copies of everything organized and ready. My PR consultant arrived early and we went over different scenarios for how this might play out. She helped me prepare responses for different outcomes, whether we reached an agreement or had to go public. Lila printed out fresh copies of all the evidence and arranged them in labeled folders on the conference table. When Natalia arrived with Sharon, they both looked tired and stressed. We all sat down at the conference table with everything documented, and my phone recording the conversation after getting their consent. The weight of all those folders of evidence sat between us like a wall. The conference room door opened and a man in an expensive suit walked in, and Natalia stood up so fast she knocked over her water bottle. She introduced him as the senior vice president who'd flown in from New York just for this meeting, and I could see Sharon's hands tighten on her briefcase handle. He sat down at the head of the table and looked directly at me before picking up one of the folders and opening it. His face changed as he flipped through the security footage screenshots, the Instagram posts with the pig emojis and the witness statements from other customers who'd seen what happened. I pushed the second folder toward him with the Consumer Protection Agency complaint number written on top in red pen and watched his jaw clench when he saw the case had already been filed. Lila handed him the third folder containing the documentation from the security company about their guard putting his hands on me, plus the medical photos of the bruises on my arm. The senior VP set down the papers and looked at Natalia, then at Sharon, then back at me, and I could see him doing the math on how bad this could get for them. He asked to see the full security footage on Lila's laptop, so we played the whole hour of me being followed, blocked, measured without permission, and finally dragged out by security while the staff laughed. When it finished, he closed the laptop and rubbed his temples before saying they needed to discuss our demands seriously. I laid out each requirement again while he took notes on his phone, asking specific questions about the training programs and security protocols we wanted changed. Sharon kept trying to interrupt with legal concerns, but he waved her off and focused on what we were asking for. After about an hour of back and forth, with him making several phone calls to other executives, he agreed to mandatory quarterly sensitivity training for all staff nationwide, not just at that one store. He also agreed to revise their security protocols so guards couldn't touch customers without actual criminal behavior, and promised a public commitment to inclusive customer service that would be posted in every store. The termination of the 3 employees involved would happen after their internal investigation confirmed our account, which he assured us would be completed within the week. We spent another hour going through the exact language of the settlement, with Lila making sure there were no broad gag orders that would prevent me from discussing my experience. They agreed to cover any therapy costs related to the incident, make a substantial donation to a body-positive nonprofit of my choosing, and most importantly, I could still talk about what happened to me even if I couldn't disclose specific settlement amounts. The senior VP signed the preliminary agreement right there, with Sharon witnessing it, and we scheduled a follow-up meeting for the final paperwork once their investigation was complete. That evening, I went to my closet and pulled out the gown I'd bought from the inclusive boutique, running my hands over the fabric and deciding this was what I'd wear to the gala tomorrow night. I sent an email to corporate's PR team informing them I wouldn't be photographed in their brand at any family events going forward and that they shouldn't expect any endorsements from me. Small choices, maybe, but they mattered to me after everything that had happened. The next night at the gala, I stood at the podium in my beautiful gown from the inclusive store and gave brief remarks about dignity and inclusion in all spaces, never mentioning specific brands but making my point clear enough. Several people approached me afterward at the cocktail reception, touching my arm and saying they knew exactly what I was referencing from the rumors that had been circulating. My mother even pulled me aside to say she'd heard from her friends on the board about changes happening at certain luxury retailers, and while she didn't say it directly, I could tell she understood my impact. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a news alert showing the corporate statement they'd just released about recommitting to inclusive customer service and announcing new training initiatives across all their stores. The manager had also sent me a personal email, acknowledging her failure to create a safe environment and apologizing for not being present when her staff was behaving that way. A week passed before the journalist's article came out, and when it did, it focused on systemic discrimination in luxury retail rather than making my story into gossip. She cited the brand's new commitments as an example of needed change in the industry and included statistics about size discrimination that made the problem clear without sensationalizing individual incidents. The online reactions were mostly thoughtful, with people sharing their own experiences in the comments and discussing how these stores had made them feel unwelcome for various reasons. One of the saleswomen even sent me a private message through Instagram, saying she'd been doing a lot of thinking about her behavior and wanted to apologize for how she'd treated me. 2 weeks after that, I was walking downtown for a lunch meeting and passed by the boutique, noticing new signage in the window about their commitment to serving all customers with respect and dignity. The old security guard was gone, replaced by someone younger who just smiled and opened the door for people without that suspicious scanning look. I stood there for a moment, looking through the window at the same marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but chose not to go in because I genuinely had no need to shop there anymore. My first therapy appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday in a small office building downtown, and I walked in carrying all the documentation from the case even though the therapist said I wouldn't need it. She had gray hair pulled back in a loose bun and wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, gesturing for me to sit in the leather chair across from her desk while she reviewed the intake forms I'd filled out. The settlement covered 12 sessions, and she explained that we'd focus on processing the trauma without letting it become my whole identity, which made sense even though I wasn't sure how to separate the experience from who I was now. We spent that first hour going through what happened step by step, and she stopped me several times to point out how I'd protected myself by documenting everything instead of just accepting the treatment. During our third session, she helped me see that standing up wasn't just about the money or the policy changes, but about refusing to let them make me small, and that realization hit me harder than I expected. My mother called that weekend asking if I wanted to have lunch at her club, which was unusual since we typically only saw each other at family events. She ordered her usual salad while I got the salmon, and halfway through the meal, she put down her fork and said she'd been thinking about everything that happened. She told me she would have handled it differently, probably with lawyers and private settlements to keep things quiet, but she understood why I chose the public route and was proud of how I'd managed the whole situation. We talked for another hour about the changes at the boutique and how several of her friends had mentioned hearing about new training programs at their favorite stores. And even though she didn't say it directly, I knew she was taking some credit for raising a daughter who wouldn't back down. The nonprofit called the next week asking if I'd be interested in helping them develop resources for people facing size discrimination in retail and other public spaces. I started going to their office every Wednesday afternoon, working with their team to create pamphlets and online guides about knowing your rights and documenting discrimination. They had me review real complaints from people who'd experienced similar treatment, helping them craft responses and connect with legal resources when appropriate. After 6 weeks of volunteering, they asked me to join their advisory board, and I accepted immediately, because the work felt more meaningful than anything I'd done before. 3 months had passed since that day in the boutique, and I could walk past it now without my chest getting tight or my hands shaking. The boutique had implemented real changes according to the quarterly report they were required to send. The 3 saleswomen had been terminated after the investigation, and I'd helped create accountability in an industry that rarely faced any consequences for how they treated people. Thanks for hanging out and exploring all this with me today. Really was fascinating diving into those questions together. Until next time, friends, take it easy. Like the video, it helps more than you think.